Now, when we reviewed the Mazda CX-5, we championed the 2.2-litre turbo diesel engine, saying that it was the best blend of performance and fuel economy. However, there are a bunch of you who seem to believe that diesel ought to be reserved only for agricultural vehicles. You're wrong, but despite that, we figured that we might as well show off what we think is the best alternative in the CX-5 lineup. And so here we have the facelifted, refreshed Mazda CX-5 2.5. And we're going to tell you everything you need to know and exactly why it is that we think this is still one of the best C-segment SUVs out there. My name is Aiman Abdullah, this is Malaysian Motoring, and this is our review of the updated Mazda CX-5 2.5. Now, as part of this update, the Mazda CX-5 saw some aesthetic upgrades in the front. So we now have a reprofiled front bumper without LED front fog lights and a much neater lower valance, if you ask me. We also get this much chunkier chrome grille surrounding this lovely new black grille with horizontal inlets. Now, we also get a new set of headlights which are sharper than before, but more importantly are also all LED with a new LED light signature as well as an LED indicator, which is something that the previous pre-facelift model didn't get. Now, if you ask me, the front end of the CX-5 is now a lot more successful than before. It was never a bad looking car, but it certainly looks a lot sharper now. And this polymetal grey certainly looks very good as well. So overall, this is still quite successful. Now, down the side, everything looks exactly the same as a 2.2-litre turbo diesel, although it is worth noting that lower grade models like the 2-litre mid and high get 17-inch alloy wheels, whereas everything above that get these lovely 19-inch alloy wheels with a nice different design. Now, the side of the CX-5 sees no changes from the pre-facelift to the facelift model, except for the slightly different wheel designs. And I think that nothing really had to change because overall, the side profile of the CX-5 still looks pretty good. I appreciate the fact that, for example, the body cladding is not overly done, like the CX-30, and that the doors actually go all the way underneath sort of the base of the car, so that if the side does get dirty, you're not going to dirty the back of your pants getting in and out. And overall, like I said, the side profile of this car does look quite good, although I personally would recommend getting the red, simply because the lack of body lines on the side of this car means that the red looks especially good, although again, this polymetal grey is doing a pretty good job at convincing me otherwise. Now, the back of the CX-5 actually fixes one of the things that I dislike most about this car, and that was the tail lights. Because now you get a similar design as what you get in the front with that sort of double C shape, and it stretches further into the tailgate, whereas the old one seemed to have ended sort of about here and made it look unusually squinty. Now, the thing about the CX-5 is that it also has actual exhaust exits, which are nice to see simply because there really isn't that many left out there. Most of them either have fake exhaust exits or they hide them behind the bumper, so that's always nice to see. Now, the badging on the back has also been neatened up ever so slightly with new badges for CX-5 as well as for the 2.5 logo over there. We no longer see the GLS or GLE or various different other nameplates for the variant. Now it just gives you the engine code. Now, behind this tailgate, there are also no changes, which is again a good thing, because in addition to there being a powered tailgate, you'll also find a very good amount of space. And the rear seats can be folded 40-20-40 for maximum practicality, and they can be done from here. So I can actually fold the center seat individually, or I can fold both seats just. See, I was hoping that would be spring-loaded because that would look better for the camera. But in any case, it does create a fully flat load bay, which means you can put longer items in this car without issue, or by just using the center tunnel alone, you can fit long items while still maintaining decent carrying capacity for people. Now, underneath this standard fit Maggie mat, you will find a space saver spare wheel, as well as the standard set of Burma's Auto emergency kits, as well as the care cushion, which Mazda owners must really like because I've seen this in every Mazda so far. Inside the CX-5, again, it's a matter of very small changes. So for starters, this infotainment screen is now an inch larger than before, and I do think they've done a little bit more to that screen they're letting on, because I'm pretty sure the pixels are denser than before as well, although unfortunately it still runs the older Mazda MZD Connect system, which means it doesn't have the newest interface like what we've seen from the Mazda 3 and CX-30. The instrument cluster, however, is bang up to date with the very latest from Mazda, and so it's a partially digital screen with 2 dials on either side, or 3 dials on either side, tachometer on the left, as well as your temperature and fuel gauge on the right, as well as a digital screen in the middle to show you your speed, your trip information, your instant fuel economy, and so on and so forth, which is very nice, very crisp, and it responds well enough. In fact, this digital instrument cluster is so successful that I've had people get into this car and swear that that was actually an analog dial, and so their minds just went poof when I showed them that it's actually a screen. Now, that said, however, the interior architecture of this car is still very similar to what we've seen in the past, which means you still get lovely soft touch materials all over the place, lovely stitching on the front of the dash top as well as here on the door cards. You still get some of that fake wood and more of that lovely soft touch material as you go down along the door cards themselves. You get more stitching here on the armrest, which is also nice and soft. You get more stitching here on the center armrest as well, more stitching here, more stitching here. Overall, this just looks pretty good. It is worth noting, however, that when we reviewed the diesel, we remarked that this contrast stitching, which is done up in this bronze color, matched very nicely with the platinum quartz hue that our CX-5 diesel came in. On this polymetal grey car, it's still bronze. Just a small thing. Now, aside from that, the controls in here are still very nice. So we still get a lovely Mazda steering wheel, so it's thin rim with lovely buttons that are all very easy to use. You still get an MZD Connect controller down here, which means you get a knob for your volume, a knob to control that system, because this doesn't really respond to touch. It does, but honestly, as soon as you start moving, or when the car is not in park, or it doesn't have its handbrake on, or any myriad of things are not working the way it wants to, it stops being a touchscreen. And though honestly, although you can touch it, just use the knob. Now, of course, we also get a couple of nice creature comfort updates, such as ventilated front seats, which are both also powered with memory adjustment or memory ability on the driver's side. This steering wheel, for example, can be adjusted in a myriad of ways, ensuring that you can get nice and comfortable. And of course, the memory functionality for that seat also includes mirror controls as well, so you can actually share this car between 2 or 3 people and they shouldn't be too cheesed off. That said, it should only be 2 people because there's only memory for 2 settings. Now, that said, the CX-5 is ultimately a practical family car, which means you need a lot of practical accoutrements, such as a couple of large cup holders here, a 12-volt socket here, a nice Qi wireless charger here, a bottle holder here, little pockets here, and a relatively large center console bin with another USB port as well as another 12-volt socket should you need it, as well as this little tray, which is nice for us to keep the key for the car that we left behind. Now, again, this is a family car, which means everything in here is not only nice to look at, but it's also very durable. And I have no doubt that all the materials in here should be able to weather the very worst that family abuse can throw at it. Now, in the back of the CX-5, again, everything in here is very positive. With this seat sub in my driving position, I have a pretty good amount of knee room and, of course, a pretty good amount of headroom. And because this front seat is set up quite high, it does mean that I can tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me with plenty of space to spare. In fact, I reckon some NBA basketball players may be able to fit their feet underneath this seat. Now, there are pockets behind those seats. There are a set of crotch coolers here, which is always very nice. There are decently sized door bins here, large enough to fit a litre-sized bottle. And again, the quality in here is all very good. You get more stitching here, more soft touch material, more stitching here, more soft touch material. And of course, you also get a center armrest here, which sits nicely, which reveals a couple of cup holders, a small device holder here, as well as USB-C ports that hide underneath this little tray, which of course does mean that if you put 3 abreast back here, you will not have access to your USB ports. It is worth noting, however, that a lot of the USB ports in this car are USB-A, including the ones back here, which I think are a little bit old hat because they ought to be updated to USB-C. That said, however, if you're going to use this as a family car, these doors open to almost a full 90 degrees, which means putting in a child seat should not be too difficult. And because this car's relatively long wheelbase, it does mean that a rear-facing child seat should not have too much trouble sat back here. The ISOFIX mounts are decently easy to find, and as I mentioned earlier, these seats do fold individually, so you can fold the center seat in order to make room for more or longer cargo while still maintaining space for passengers on either side. Now, there are no sun blinds here because most C-segment saloons don't come with them, but Mazdas do come as standard with tint, which means that children back here should be pretty well catered for, and there shouldn't be too much UV ingress into the rear half of the cabin, so children and adults will be nice and comfortable. Now, the CX-5 is favored by younger families simply because it's got very good quality, it's very nice in here, and overall it does feel a lot more upmarket than other C-segment SUVs within this price space. However, to me, the biggest selling point of a CX-5 comes from the driver's seat. And of course, as it is with most modern Mazdas, everything up here is very positive. So up front, you'll find a 2.5-litre naturally aspirated 4-cylinder Skyactiv G engine, which produces a reasonable amount of power and a reasonable amount of torque. More importantly, it produces more power and torque, as you'd expect, than the 2-litre, although admittedly the torque number is significantly less than what you get from the diesel. Now, of course, some of you may argue that you might want the torque from the diesel, especially if you're driving over longer distances, and I'd agree. The diesel is especially good for people who use their cars to cover lots and lots of ground, particularly because diesel engines are very fuel efficient, and of course with that additional torque does make life a lot easier when you're trying to overtake on the motorway or if you're climbing hills and so on. But this 2.5-litre arguably is perhaps one of the better engines in the range. The 2-litre in the CX-5 can feel a little bit gutless. It's alright in town, but the moment you ask any more of it, it starts to fall off a cliff. And some may argue that the diesel, on the other hand, is a bit too clattery for town use, which is absolute nonsense. And the 2.5-litre turbo, on the other hand, consumes way too much fuel, regardless of whether or not you're in town or whether you're on the open road. That is an engine that I would advise that you just miss altogether. So if you don't want the diesel, then this 2.5-litre NA engine becomes your sole option. Partly because this is a pretty good blend of performance and fuel economy. Now, we've had this car for about a week and it's returned about 12 kilometers per litre, which is equivalent to about 8-ish litres per 100 kilometers, which to me doesn't seem that bad at all, particularly given the fact this car does have a decent amount of power and torque when you need it. More importantly, however, compared to the diesel, I will admit that this engine is very, very smooth and very, very refined. That's because obviously it isn't a turbo diesel, which means the power delivery is smoother. When this car idles, it doesn't shake as much, although honestly the diesel is quite smooth anyway. And it does also mean that when you're stuck in traffic jams, when the car's doing its traffic jam assist and gliding you through traffic, it is a slightly more refined place to be, although we would really be splitting hairs. But more importantly, over the diesel, this 2.5-litre NA petrol engine is also a little bit lighter, which means that dynamically the CX-5 is now even better to drive. Not that the diesel was particularly bad, although we admit that as we drove it, we began to realize that this is meant to be a vehicle driven like a luxury car. Whereas this, you can actually have quite a bit of fun in it. And of course, because this is a Mazda petrol engine, the torque delivery is lovely and linear, which means it's very predictable, and so should the mood take you, you can have quite a bit of fun in this mid-size family SUV. Now, on the matter of fun, as part of the facelift, the CX-5 also gained G-Vectoring Control 2.0, or the latest version of Mazda's G-Vectoring Control system. Now, G-Vectoring Control essentially works by breaking individual wheels in order to make the car's body movements a little bit more controlled and to make the interior feel a little bit more comfortable. Now, by reducing body movement, it does mean that this car is a lot more comfortable to travel in. Mazda's logic is that when the body of the car moves less, you'll be engaging your core muscles less often, which means that sitting in the car and driving along in it, or being sat in it and being driven along in it, is a lot more comfortable and a lot more painless. And I would argue that it does work to some extent. The CX-5, despite not having fancy suspension or electric roll bars or whatever, this car just rides really, really well. The passive ride and handling in this car is already very good, with a lovely blend of body control, dynamics, as well as comfort. But thanks to G-Vectoring Control, it does mean that the cabin stays more level more of the time, making this car feel a lot more pleasant and, more importantly, a lot more confident, particularly when you take corners. This is especially useful when you're on the motorway, when you have those large sweeping bends that can cause the vehicle to lean and therefore cause passengers to feel like the car is leaning or tilting, which usually it isn't. but it just reduces the way that feels within the cabin, which again makes everything in here feel a little bit more pleasant. In addition to that, life in here is made pleasant thanks to the upgrades in terms of NVH. Now, Mazda has made lots and lots of very small incremental upgrades to this car in order to make it more pleasant, more comfortable, more of the time. So for example, all the glass in this car is now laminated glass, also known as acoustic glass to some brands, which basically means that there are two pieces of glass with a piece of plastic laminate in the middle. What this does is it helps to reduce heat ingress, but more importantly, it also reduces the amount of noise that gets into the cabin. As a result, it means that the CX-5 is an incredibly pleasant place to be. Regardless of whether or not you're in town or when you're out on the motorway and munching miles, the CX-5 is lovely and quiet and serene. It makes everything just feel so comfortable, and you really can do miles in this car. Now, compared to the diesel, obviously this 2.5 litre is not going to be as efficient out on the motorway, but the difference is not as big as I expected. Because this 2.5 litre is very well matched to this car, it does mean that maintaining 110, 120 kilometers an hour does not require that much of the engine and therefore does not consume that much fuel doing so. Now, the fuel economy figure that I mentioned earlier, about 12 kilometers per litre, is something that we received or something that we figured out while driving this car through a mix of conditions, through traffic, through motorway drives, as well as some slightly more spirited B-road drives. So overall, this is a pretty reliable figure, and because this is not a turbocharged engine, it does mean that when you do drive faster and more intently, you're not going to see your fuel economy fall off a cliff. But when you're not driving intently, when you're not driving like your arse is on fire, the CX-5 still remains a really pleasant place to be, thanks to Mazda's safety suite of active safety systems. So the CX-5 high models now all come as standard with radar-guided cruise control with traffic jam assist, 360-degree cameras, blind spot monitoring, rear cross-traffic alert with autonomous rear braking, as well as several other goodies in here, which all make everything nice and pleasant. Now, over the diesel model, as I mentioned earlier, when you use a traffic jam assist and you're stuck in stop-start traffic, this petrol engine does mean that progress is a little bit smoother and a little bit more refined over the diesel mill, which means that if you have to have a petrol CX-5, this is the engine that I'd recommend. Because yes, the road tax is a little bit higher, and sure that when you're idling it does consume a little bit more fuel, but all in all, it's really not that bad. 8 liters per 100 kilometers rather, is still a very reasonable figure, especially again given the performance on offer. The tractability of this engine, the ability to use it both in town and out on the open road, means that it is something that is very usable and very easy to live with, and therefore makes it our recommendation within the petrol range. Although that said, if you do need more power and more torque, obviously go for the diesel. That is our definite favorite, especially given the fact that between this 2.5 litre front-wheel drive model versus the 2.2 litre turbo diesel front-wheel drive model, you're talking about a difference of about 5,000 ringgit, which in the grand scheme of things at this price point is inconsequential. Furthermore, the savings that you get in that diesel, particularly if you're covering a lot of motorway miles, is substantial, and so it is certainly worth taking a look. But all in all, the CX-5 clearly presents a very, very good product from Mazda, simply because it's clear to us that no matter where you end up in the range, should you want the 2 litre because you want a gutless engine, or should you want the 2.5 litre turbocharged mill because you're insane, or you get the diesel, or you get this, regardless of which CX-5 you get, this is still a very, very good car. It's very well specified for the market, and more importantly, this is proof that Burmaz only puts in the things that you need and not anything more than that, allowing these cars to remain very competitively priced while still offering all the specifications that the modern customer needs. And on top of that, being a Mazda, obviously this car comes with a 5-year unlimited mileage warranty as well as a 5-year service package, which basically means 5 years of worry-free ownership. That is priceless. And when you add to that Burmaz's excellent standards for after sales, it means that this is truly a painless ownership experience. I understand why it is that these cars are so popular, and even though I'm not really much of a CX-5 person myself, I will admit that both the 2.2 litre turbo diesel and this 2.5 litre NA model are growing on me quite a bit. That said, however, if you want something that's even more efficient in town especially, then you might be better served by Honda's CR-V with the eHEV hybrid system. That's because that powertrain is just meant to eke out the most kilometers per litre, particularly when you're driving in town. And of course, if you want something more dynamic, well, good luck. The CX-5 is so well sorted over B roads and twisty bits that honestly you'll be hard-pressed to find something more fun than this. So all in all, the CX-5 once again puts its best foot forward, even when it's using the second best engine in the lineup. It's quite clear that Mazda is doing very, very well with this car and will continue to do very well with this car, and there's no doubt that we'll continue to see these things plaguing the streets of Subang Jaya. In any case, that's been our review of the Mazda CX-5 2.5 High. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to notify every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below, as well as the link to join our new WhatsApp channel. It's all down there. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.